The Milgram Experiment. In 1961, Stanley Milgram, psychologist at Yale University, posed a fundamental question after the horrors of World War II. How far is an individual willing to go to obey legitimate authority? To find out, Milgram gathered volunteers, the teachers, in a laboratory. Their mission: administer increasingly intense electric shocks to a learner for each error in a memory test. The shocks ranged from 15 to 450 volts. But here's the secret: the shocks weren't real. The learner was an actor. The volunteers had no idea. As the intensity increased, the learner's screams and pleas became unbearable. The volunteer, distressed, turned to the experimenter. The experimenter, in a calm voice, ordered them to continue. It was essential to the success of the experiment. The result was terrifying. 65% of participants went all the way to 450 volts, to the level labeled 3 X's, severe danger. The Milgram experiment reveals a dark truth. Ordinary people, under pressure from recognized authority, can commit acts against their own conscience. It demonstrates the immense power of obedience to authority. The corrupting power. The Stanford Prison Experiment, 1971. In 1971, psychologist Philip Zimbardo transformed the basement of Stanford University into a fake prison. 24 ordinary, mentally healthy students were randomly assigned as guards or prisoners. The goal: study how social roles influence behavior. The adaptation was terrifying and rapid. Within days, the guards developed sadistic behaviors. They humiliated. They punished arbitrarily. They psychologically tortured the prisoners. Some prisoners showed severe emotional disturbances and acute depression. The experiment was supposed to last 2 weeks. It was stopped after only 6 days. The situation deteriorated too quickly. The study proves that with institutional power, normal individuals can rapidly lose their humanity and become abusive. The herd instinct. The Asch conformity test, 1950s. In the 1950s, psychologist Solomon Asch gathered groups of volunteers for an alleged vision test. The task was simple: compare a reference line to 3 other lines and identify the matching one. The answer was obvious, but there was a trap. In each group, only one participant was real. All the others were Asch's accomplices. During key tests, the accomplices all gave the wrong answer out loud. Faced with group pressure, about 1/3, 33% of real participants conformed to the wrong answer. The experiment reveals the power of social pressure. People often prefer to be wrong with the group rather than affirm the truth alone. Collective indifference. The bystander effect. In 1964, Kitty Genovese was assaulted and killed in New York under her neighbor's eyes. The attack lasted over 30 minutes. Reports indicated that dozens of people heard her screams. Witnesses saw the assault from their windows. Yet no one called the police in time. This tragic case shocked America and sparked a crucial question: why didn't anyone help? Psychologists Bibb Latane and John Darley then formalized the bystander effect. The more witnesses present during an emergency, the less likely any individual is to intervene. To prove this, they conducted experiments. In one study, participants were placed in a room that slowly filled with smoke. When alone, 75% reported the smoke within 2 minutes, but when placed with passive actors who ignored the smoke, only 10% reported it, even as the room became dangerously hazy. This phenomenon is explained by diffusion of responsibility. Each individual feels less responsible to act. They assume someone else will do it. There's also pluralistic ignorance. People look to others for cues on how to react. If everyone appears calm, individuals convince themselves there's no real emergency. In a crowd, inaction isn't always indifference. It's the ambiguity of collective responsibility. The more people present, the more we unconsciously wait for someone else to take the first step. The lesson is clear. In an emergency, don't wait for the crowd. Act. Programmed fear. The Little Albert Experiment. In 1920, researchers John B. Watson and Rosalie Rayner wanted to prove a radical theory: that emotions can be learned, even fear. They believed we aren't born afraid of things. We're conditioned to fear them. To test this, they chose a 9-month-old baby known as Little Albert. At the start, Albert showed no fear of animals. He happily played with a white rat, a rabbit, even a dog. He was a calm, emotionally stable child. Then, the conditioning began. The experiment was simple but disturbing. They presented Albert with the white rat. The moment he reached out to touch it, Watson struck a steel bar with a hammer behind the child's head. The noise was sudden, loud, terrifying. Albert jumped and cried. They repeated this process: rat, loud noise, rat, loud noise, over and over. After only 7 pairings, something changed. Albert began crying in fear at the mere sight of the white rat. Even without the noise, the association was complete. His brain had linked the rat to terror. But the experiment revealed something even more disturbing. This fear spread beyond the rat. The child developed an aversion to other white and fluffy objects: a rabbit, a fur coat, cotton wool, even a Santa Claus mask. The fear had generalized to anything that resembled the original stimulus. This phenomenon is called classical conditioning, or Pavlovian conditioning. Watson had proven his point. Fear isn't innate. It can be programmed through association. The ethical implications were devastating. Albert was never deconditioned. He left the study with these manufactured fears, and his true identity remained unknown for decades. The experiment proves that our deepest fears, our phobias, our anxieties might not be natural reactions. They could be learned responses, programmed into us through experiences we don't even remember. Instant prejudice, the blue eyes, brown eyes experiment. In 1968, the day after Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, third-grade teacher Jane Elliott faced her all-white classroom in Iowa. Her students asked questions about racism and discrimination. Elliott decided they needed more than explanations. They needed to experience it. So she conducted a bold and controversial experiment. She wanted them to understand racism by living it. On the first day, Elliott declared blue-eyed children superior. She told the class that blue-eyed people were smarter, cleaner, more civilized than brown-eyed people. Blue-eyed children received privileges. They could take seconds at lunch. They got extra recess time. They could drink directly from the water fountain. Brown-eyed children were forced to wear collars. They couldn't use the same water fountain. They were seated at the back of the class. Elliott openly criticized them, blaming their eye color for any mistakes they made. The transformation was instant and shocking. Within hours, the blue-eyed children became arrogant and cruel. They refused to play with their brown-eyed friends. They mocked them. They enforced the arbitrary rules with enthusiasm. Their academic performance even improved during tasks. The brown-eyed children became withdrawn and ashamed. Previously confident students became hesitant and anxious. Their test scores dropped. They began to believe they truly were inferior. The next day, Elliott completely reversed the roles. Now, brown-eyed children were superior. Blue-eyed children wore the collars, and the same pattern repeated. The newly superior group became cruel. The newly inferior group became submissive. Children who had been victims the day before became oppressors without hesitation. At the end of the 2 days, Elliott brought the children together. She revealed the truth. There was no difference between them. Eye color meant nothing. The children embraced, some crying, finally understanding the arbitrary cruelty of discrimination. The experiment demonstrates how quickly prejudice and discrimination take root and affect behavior, even in innocent children. It proves that racism isn't natural or innate, it's learned, and it can be unlearned. Years later, many of Elliott's students credited this uncomfortable experience with shaping their understanding of justice and equality. They had lived discrimination, and they never forgot it. The destructive power of words, the monster study. In 1939, researchers at the University of Iowa conducted one of the most unethical experiments in psychological history. Led by Wendell Johnson, a speech pathologist who himself stuttered, they wanted to explore a disturbing question. Can negative words alone create a disability? They chose 22 orphan children from Iowa, vulnerable children with no parents to protect, children who spoke perfectly normally. The researchers divided them into 2 groups. The control group received positive speech therapy. They were praised, encouraged, told they spoke beautifully. But the experimental group faced something far darker. Half the children who spoke normally were subjected to negative criticism therapy. Every time they spoke, they were interrupted. They were constantly reprimanded for the slightest hesitation, the smallest imperfection. The researchers told them they were beginning to stutter, that their speech was defective, that they should be ashamed. The children were labeled, stigmatized, told repeatedly that something was wrong with them. The results were devastating and immediate. Children who had spoken fluently began to struggle. They became hyper-aware of every word. They started hesitating, second-guessing themselves. Some developed permanent stuttering. Others stopped speaking altogether in class, paralyzed by anxiety and fear of judgment. The psychological damage went beyond speech. These children developed deep insecurity. They avoided social situations. They believed they were fundamentally broken. Their self-confidence was shattered by words alone. The study remained hidden for decades. When it finally surfaced in 2001, the University of Iowa issued a formal apology. The study became infamous for its lack of ethics, hence its nickname, the Monster Study. Johnson never published the results. Perhaps he understood the horror of what he'd done. He had proven his hypothesis, but at a terrible cost. He had taken healthy children and damaged them permanently through verbal abuse disguised as science. The study proves that verbal stigmatization can profoundly shape and even destroy a person's identity and abilities. Words aren't just sounds, they're weapons. They can build someone up or tear them down, and once the damage is done, it can last a lifetime. The children in this study carried these scars for over 60 years. Some never fully recovered. The difficulty of normality. The Rosenhan Experiment. In 1973, psychologist David Rosenhan asked a question that would shake psychiatry to its core. Can mental hospitals tell the difference between sanity and insanity? To find out, he recruited 8 mentally healthy people, including himself. They were a psychology graduate student, 3 psychologists, a pediatrician, pediatrician, a psychiatrist, a painter, and a housewife, all perfectly sane, all about to fake their way into psychiatric institutions. The plan was simple. They would call 12 different psychiatric hospitals across 5 states, claiming to hear a voice, just one symptom, a voice saying 3 words: empty, hollow, and thud. That was it. No other symptoms, no history of mental illness. Once admitted, they were instructed to act completely normally, to tell the truth about their lives, to cooperate with staff, and to try to get released by proving their sanity. All 8 pseudo-patients were admitted. Not one was turned away. All were diagnosed with serious mental disorders. 7 received diagnoses of schizophrenia. 1 was labeled with manic depressive psychosis. And then something disturbing happened. The moment they were labeled mentally ill, everything they did was reinterpreted through that lens. When Rosenhan took notes for his research, nurses wrote in his chart, "Patient engages in writing behavior." Normal actions became symptoms. Pacing the hallway became anxiety. Boredom became emotional disturbance. The pseudo-patients tried to demonstrate their sanity. They behaved normally. They spoke rationally. They followed all the rules. But no staff member detected they were faking. Not the psychiatrists, not the nurses, not the orderlies. Ironically, real patients noticed. Several approached the pseudo-patients saying, "You're not crazy. You're a journalist or a professor checking up on the hospital." The pseudo-patients were hospitalized for 7 to 52 days. The average stay was 19 days. To get released, they had to admit they were mentally ill and agree to take antipsychotic medication. They had to accept the label to escape it. When discharged, not one was declared sane. Their discharge papers read schizophrenia in remission. The label stuck. They would forever be seen as people who had been mentally ill, not people who had been misdiagnosed. The experiment reveals a disturbing bias called confirmatory bias. Once an individual is labeled sick, all their behaviors are interpreted to confirm that diagnosis. Context disappears. The setting, the label, the expectation all shape what doctors see. The study raises profound questions about the reliability of psychiatric diagnoses. If trained professionals cannot distinguish the sane from the insane in the environment where they should be most expert, what does that say about diagnosis itself? And it forces us to ask, what is the nature of madness and normality? Where is the line? And who decides which side we're on? This is Dark Psychology Explained.